going to be studying chapter 5, verse 14 through chapter 6, verse 3. That's 5 verses. That's all we're going to do today. When I get through with those, we're going to quit and leave. Okay, so let's go back to verse 13, since we're going to start with verse 14. Verse 13 says this, chapter 5, verse 13. When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his sores, then Ephraim turned to Assyria and sent the great king for help. But he is not able to he is not able to cure you, not able to heal your sores. So going back to verse 13, we see that we're entering a section which is addressed to both Israel and Judah. What's another name for Israel? Spit it out. Northern Kingdom. The other name for Judah is? Southern Kingdom. Okay. All right, so then going back to verse 12, let me read verse 12. Go back to verse 12, it says, I am like a moth to Ephraim, like rot to the people of Judah. We talked about going back to verse 12, we see that both Judah and Israel are getting worse in terms of their ability and willingness to relate to God. God was, in that verse 12, he specified himself to be like pus to Israel, which is a rapidly increasing infection which can and will destroy the patient. You'll die from it if you don't do something about it. God was like rot to Judah. The end result is the same as that of pus as its victim. It just works slower. If you've got an infection and you don't do something about it, it gets bad quickly. It gets bad quickly. But if you talk about something rotting like wood on a house, side of a house, it takes much longer for that rot to occur. But the end result is the same if you don't do something about it. Okay, so both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are in a state where God will discipline because of their spiritual infidelity to him. That's what this is all about, spiritual infidelity. God finally got enough of it, and he's going to destroy the northern kingdom, but he's going to severely discipline the southern kingdom. Okay, so that brings us to verse 14. Let me read verse 14. For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, like a great lion to Judah. I will tear them to pieces and go away. I will carry them off with no one to rescue them. Here God is pictured as a destructive lion to both Israel and Judah. Remember, we started talking about Hosea primarily is directing his ministry towards the northern kingdom. But there's messages in here for both, because what happens is the northern kingdom got bad before Judah did, and the hope was that Judah would see the problems and the infidelity of the northern kingdom and be able to get their situation corrected. We see that's not going to happen. Okay, so he's pictured as a destructive lion to both Israel and Judah. The emphasis is on God, who is referenced as I. When he says I, he means I, God. In this verse, he will not be a lion, he will be like a lion. What does a lion do to his prey? Rips and tears and devours. Pretty fierce. We saw that over in 1st or 2nd Peter. We talked about that. About the false teachers are like a crouching lion, or like sin is like a crouching lion to devour its prey. Same kind of thing here. And he will be so to both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. He's going to be a lion. He calls himself, he'll be like like a great lion, like a lion to Ephraim and a great lion to Judah. Same situation. As a lion, he will tear them to pieces. He will carry them off after he has torn them to pieces, and no one can help them. That's what we're talking about. We've got the northern kingdom wanted protection from Egypt, so they made an alliance with Assyria. We can't protect ourselves, so let's get some mighty country to help us. So they said, we'll get Assyria to help us protect ourselves from Egypt. Okay? Ultimately, Assyria crushed Egypt. And then what did they do? Then they came for the northern kingdom. Alliances change when the needs of countries change. Right now, this is what makes my lessons get long, because this is not in my notes. But right now, the United States is pushing for, what's the thing if you put on other countries, on Iran, where we've got putting restraints on them for other countries not to buy their oil. Okay? Well, our allies are in Europe. Europe is our allies. Well, Europe needs their oil. So rather than want to support us in our efforts for the stuff we want to do against Iran, they want to buy Iran's oil. So things change. They were our allies in all things, but now they need oil, so their changes need, so their alliances are going to change. Okay? We had Russia as an ally in World War II. We've talked about that. What happened later in the 80s and the 70s and the 60s? That all changed. They became our enemy. The Cold War started, and they're no longer nobody would consider them our ally now, I don't believe. So that's the kind of thing that happens. They had an alliance with Assyria, so they'd have protection against Egypt. Assyria goes and crushes Egypt. So now what does the northern kingdom do? They have nobody. There's nobody there to help them. God uses Assyria to take them captive and extract discipline on them. Okay. Here God will use Assyria to conquer the northern kingdom and carry them into captivity, and no power on earth can stop them. This is set in motion. God is doing it, and nobody can stop it. Furthermore, we are told that the northern kingdom will be destroyed. If you go back to chapter 4, verse 5 and 6, we see that the northern kingdom is going to feel more than just discipline. They're going to feel destruction. What happens with the way Assyria conquers people, when they conquer them, they deport them. They send them into the nations, and the nations assimilate them. So to the extent that Israel, the northern kingdom, Israel, when they are assimilated, when they moved into the nations, to the extent that they intermarry with the people there, their bloodlines will be destroyed and they'll cease to exist. But on the other hand, to the extent that they do not intermarry and keep their bloodline pure, they will be able to participate in the promises of restoration that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Okay. The same thing has almost the same result with the southern kingdom, except for the promise God made to David. The same result would occur. David was promised that his throne would last forever. So that means that when Babylon overruns the southern kingdom, they won't be destroyed. They're going to be taken captive, but they're not going to be destroyed. There'll always be a remnant. Babylon will conquer the northern kingdom and take them captive, but they will remain separate and not be assimilated into the nations. Here's the way it works, just as a review. This is all of Israel. Okay? We had the Civil War where the northern kingdom was created and the southern kingdom was created. We got the 10 tribes go to the north and 2 to the south. When Jeroboam, the first king of the northern kingdom, took power, he set up his own prophets, his own priests. And they were pagan, basically. And so what happened was, if we go over into 2 Chronicles 11, 13 through 17, we see the description of a migration of people from all of the 10 tribes, those verses say, those who set their hearts seeking the Lord, migrated from, just as a reminder, we got the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are set up. Migration from the northern kingdom of all of those who set their hearts on seeking the Lord, migrated to the southern kingdom. So even though when Assyria took the northern kingdom captive and deported them, there was a full complement of the whole house of Israel present in the southern kingdom. Okay, you got that? So even though some of these were destroyed, their bloodlines were destroyed, you still got full blood Israel, full blood Judah in the southern kingdom. Okay, so just a note here, Assyria conquered and took them to the nations, Babylon conquered them and took them to Babylon. So that's the way it works. Okay. Oh yeah, we're still in review, so you just right on time. So both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom cease to exist as nations. When they're taken captive, they're not nations. They're a people. They're still a people, but they're not a nation. They don't have a country. Then God says, that's what he said in verse 15. He says, I will go away. No, he says, then I will go away. When all that stuff in verse 14 occurs, he says, then I will go away, which he reiterates in verse 15. So that brings us to verse 15. Just quickly, what he said in verse 14, he's like a lion. He's like a lion to Ephraim and a great lion to Judah. So we're entering a time, a section of Hosea that has messages for both northern and southern kingdom. All right. So it gets us to verse 15. And 15 says this. This verse is awesome. This is an awesome verse. And I'm going to tell you, this lesson you will not get if you don't study every verse of Hosea. If you were studying quarterlies, or if you were doing Bible studies in any other way, these verses would be skipped. I feel certain. All right, here's verse 15. Then I will go back to my place until they admit their guilt, and they will seek my face. In their misery, they will earnestly seek me. This verse is remarkable. What has happened here is that the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom have rejected God. That's what this is all about. We talked about in chapter 4, verse 1, he said, you don't have any faithfulness or truthfulness, you don't have any covenant love, and you don't have any knowledge of God. What you do have is you're murderers, liars, cheats, thieves. In verse 2, he lists off these other things that you are. You have none of the good stuff, you only have all the bad stuff. And God has enough of it, and he's going to destroy them. Throughout the centuries, the priests and the people had lost contact with God to the point where God has decided to discipline them. They only had a list of grievous sins which were totally appalling to God. Now, those are the ones I just mentioned in chapter 4, verse 2. So God will go back to his place. That's where it gets serious. He's had enough. He said, you're not my, back at the beginning, he said, you're not my people. I'm not your God. So he goes through all that stuff, and he says, now I'm going to go back to my place. The NIV says, I'm going to go back. The ESV says, I'm going to, what does it say in the ESV? Return again? Return again?
Return again.
Return again? The NASB says, return, go away and return. The CSB says, very interesting, depart and return. I'm going to go away and return. And the King James says, go and return. It's all basically the same thing. I'm going to go away and I'm going to return. I'm going to go away, I'm going to return. I'm going to go away, I'm going to return. That's 5 times I've said it so far. For even 6, I'm going to go away and I'm going to return. You should be getting the idea. For someone to go back or return, he had to have been somewhere to return to. I'm here. The only way for me to return to my house is if I came from my house. You see that? Think about that. To return to somewhere, you had to have been there. That somewhere to which he will return is called his place in the NIV. I think it's called that in nearly every translation I looked at. Is that what it says, ESV and ASB? He's going to return to his place. Now this person who will return to his place is addressed as I. I will return to my place. This I is God. All right? Are we together? This I who is going to return to his place is God. God will return to his place, which means he had to have come here before he could return. I'm starting to love it. He had to be here. He had to, for God to go back to his place, he had to have come back. He had to come from that place to enable him to go back to that place. Furthermore, he will stay in his place that he's going to go back to until something happens. Once he goes back, he's going to stay there until something happens. That is, until they admit their guilt. Use it. Yes, sir.
I was just to say it's amazing to kind of think about the reflection of this in terms of John 14, 15, 16, even in 17, where Jesus is talking about, I've been here for a time, but I go away. But I'm sending the Helper, I'm sending the Holy Spirit to be here for you. And in this case, I'm not sending anybody. I'm going away.
Yeah.
You're not getting any part of me. Unlike
Yeah.
what will happen when it comes. Yeah.
Let me keep going. So he will stay in that place, in his place, until they admit their guilt. Using the word until means that he will come again with conditions. Under certain conditions, he will come again. And those conditions are, they will admit their guilt. So it is, if this is God who is coming and going, what is his place he will return to? That shouldn't be a hard question to answer. God is the one that has come, and he says, I'm going back to my place. What is that place he is going back to? Where'd God come from? Pretty close. I say exact. Hebrews 1:3 says this. Let me read it. Hebrews 1:3. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. It's pretty close to the throne. It's right there. Okay. So this says that Jesus returns to the right hand of God after he had provided purifications for sin. So he provided purification for sin before he returned to his place. What is that? How did he do that?
Himself.
On the cross.
Yeah.
He was crucified. He paid the price of our sin. He provided purification for sin. And then he returned to the Father through a mechanism we call what? Where'd my note go? There we go. So we already answered that. So how does he return to the right hand of the Father? He does it through the ascension. So just for clarification, we had been talking about God who returns to heaven, but it is Jesus who came and ascended. So is Jesus God? Jesus is God. We were talking about Jesus in this verse 15 of chapter 5. This is a prophecy about Jesus' second coming. Jesus will remain in his place until the Israelites admit their guilt. The NIV says admit their guilt. The ESV says acknowledge their guilt. The New American Standard says acknowledge their guilt. The King James, this is the one I like, acknowledge their offense. Their offense. Oops. Turn this thing off. The Hebrew for guilt is singular. It is a category of guilt for a particular sin. All right? That's why I like the King James best. It's talking about an offense. It's a singular offense. It is one offense. The only kind of guilt that would cause God to desert his people is their rejection of him.
It's interesting to think about it as offense, because you can find me guilty and I cannot acknowledge that I deserve that judgment of guilt. But if I sit there and say, no, I am guilty because I admit that I offended, that I committed that offense, that's another level.
That is so good, because that is the way it is. He says, I'm going back and I'm going to stay there until you admit it, until you acknowledge it.
You're the reason I am doing this.
Yeah. So, let's see, Hosea 4:1 says that they had no faithfulness, no covenant love, and no knowledge of God. They did not know him, and they did not want to know him. They were going through all this stuff. When they had the Civil War, where the northern and kingdom were divided, they kept going further and further away from God. They kept going into deeper and deeper spiritual infidelity. Okay, and so they did not want to know God. In the days of Jesus, the people rejected him. They crucified. They denied that he was the Messiah. So what did he do? He left. He paid the price of sin. We had that promise that he did that in Hebrews 1:3. but that does not say that they accepted him for who he was. He ascended to the right hand of the Father. He will stay there until they admit their guilt being based on their rejection of their Messiah. A singular offense. If they had accepted Jesus as their Messiah when he came the first time, he would not have left. That's the only thing they have to do, is accept him as their Messiah. And until they do that, he's not coming back. Not only will they admit their guilt, they will earnestly seek his face. Furthermore, when this happens, they will be in misery. I mean, I am so happy I've studied Zechariah. I am so happy. They will be in misery. They will be miserable when this happens. Basically, this establishes another prerequisite for the return or the second coming of Christ. They have to admit their guilt and they have to seek him. Until they do that, he's not coming back. Pretty clear. Zechariah 12:3. I might as well get over there. Let's look at it. Zechariah 12:3. On that day, 12:3, on that day when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. The entire world is going to be gathered against them. All the nations will be gathered against them. They will be in misery. If you look at 13:8, Zechariah 13:8 says, in the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it. Do you know that? At Armageddon, you know 2/3 of them are going to be killed? That's a lot. It's a pretty big percentage. They're going to be miserable. They're going to be watching their buddies fall all around them. Pretty miserable. It will be their darkest hour. I can't find that wording in the Bible anywhere, but I know that that's what the Jewish mothers teach their children now. In our darkest hour, that's when Messiah will come. And when your whole nation is in the process of being killed, that's a pretty dark area, dark time. Okay, Zechariah 13, verse 9, the last part of 9 says, they will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say they are my people and they will say the Lord is our God. He's going to seek their face. They're going to seek his face. They're going to be miserable. They're going to, well, we hadn't got to it yet. Keep on going. Regarding admitting their guilt, they're going to seek their face there, 13:9. They will seek his face. Regarding admitting their guilt, we're going to see that in 12:10. Every other week I use this scripture. Chapter 12, verse 10 says this. This is the second coming. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as he grieves for a firstborn son. They are going to recognize him and accept him as their Messiah. They're going to see his wounds. They're going to recognize that he's the one that they pierced, and they're going to accept him. That's all they got to do. They're going to seek his face, and they're going to accept him. And there he is. He's come back. So this is a prophecy of a second coming, a Messiah in the Old Testament. But there's more. Chapter 6. Let's go to chapter 6, verse 1. Verse 5:15 can stand alone, but it is an excellent transition into chapter 6. Let me read chapter 6, verse 1. Come, let us return to the Lord. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. Not only were Israel and Judah torn to pieces by Assyria and Babylon, they remained in that state until 1948. What happened in 1948? It became a nation again. But they have not yet acknowledged their rejection of the Messiah and sought his face. There is certainty in their voice in this verse, in that they know that God will restore them. They've said it. What they do not realize and what they will not accept is that their Messiah has already come and gone once, without their knowledge and without their acceptance of him. I think here they are saying the things God wants to hear without earnestness and without sincerity. They still have to acknowledge and accept God. They have to accept Jesus as their Messiah. All right, verse 2. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the 3rd day, he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. So when is all this stuff going to happen? After 2 days. Is that 48 hours? Nope. It's not. 48 hours is 2 days. But here, 2 days is something else. It's some other time frame. Many people today go to 2 Peter 3:8. I'm just going to read it to you. You can find it if you want to. 2 Peter 3:8. It's the verse that says, "But do not forget one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." It does not say 1,000 years is a day. It does not say one day is 1,000 years. So I'm not using that verse at all. A lot of people use it as it's an absolute measure of time. I don't see it that way. We cannot use this verse without certainty because it is not absolute. It says that one day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. So how long is 2 days? We can't get it from that verse. So we have to keep going. They have been torn to pieces and left for dead. Here they express certainty that they will be revived. After 2 days, revived, and on the 3rd day, restored. That's what it says in verse 2. But there's more. On the 3rd day, what we got to do is go to the end and then work backwards to figure out these time periods. On the 3rd day, he will restore us that we may live in his presence. When is the only time? When is the soonest time that we will live in his presence? When does the millennium begin?
Christ returns.
Huh?
When Christ returns.
Second coming. How long is a millennium? 1,000 years. I think it's a literal 1,000 years. It says it 6 times. So let me keep going. We're going to live in his presence in the millennium. So this is the third day. We'll go slow. In the third day, on the third day it says, on the third day he will restore us that we may live in his presence. So that means right there they will be restored. Right there. I drew another line down here. There's 2 days we talked about, there's the third day. That's where he's restored on the second coming. That's where the third day begins. It goes for 1,000 years. So we've already seen in Zechariah and Ezekiel and Daniel and many other places that Messiah will establish his kingdom on earth and rule for 1,000 years. It's very clear. Matthew 19:28 says this. Matthew 19:28. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says to them, Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things, that is the beginning of the millennium. That's when Eden-like conditions return to earth. It's the renewal of all things. When the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So the Jews will be restored and renewed and revived right there. All that's going to happen on the third day. They're going to be revived. And whether you believe in the pre-trib rapture or the post-trib rapture does not matter. This is the third day. I've got a line right here that our rapture either occur, you got the tribulation right here. I'm a pre-trib guy. I believe we're raptured before the tribulation, but nevertheless, it has to happen by this time. Let me keep going. So on the third day, they will be restored, and that has to happen at the beginning of the millennium. Therefore, the third day is equal to 1,000 years. I think I cut through all that pretty quickly. But nevertheless, we know that we'll be in his presence in the millennium. That's the first time it's going to happen. And we know that that time period in the millennium is 1,000 years. That is 1 day. So that 1 day sets the length of time for these 2 days, which we're going to talk about now. So after 2 days, not before the end of 2 days and not during the 2 days, but after the 2 days. That's what it said in verse 2. It said, after 2 days he will revive us. After 2 days. That means these 2 days, whatever they are, he will revive us. What happens after those 2 days? You follow this dotted line up. It's the second coming. They're gonna go through all this. They got torn to pieces. We talked about that back in verse 15 and verse 14 and verse 13. And after 2 days, he says he will revive us. Let me stay with my notes here. After 2 days, after 2 days means on the third day. It says on the third day he will revive us or restore us. Yeah, after 2 days he will revive us, and on the third day he will restore us. It's the same event. It happens at the same time. After 2 days and on the third day. It's that point right there. Right there. He will revive us and restore us. The beginning of the 2 days occurs at the ascension of 5:15. That's when he went back to his place, when he ascended. That's right there. That's the ascension right right there on that line. So that starts the time clock for the 2 days. When he went back when he was ascended. Runs for 2 days. And it runs, furthermore, it runs for 2 days is 2,000 years. If this third day is 1,000 years, it follows that those 2 days are 2,000 years. See that? So I'm getting there. I'm nearly done. But there was a point. We know it occurred. We know about when it occurred. And that runs, the 2 days runs for 2,000 years. 2,000 years makes it 2033. If he was ascended in 33, I'm not setting dates. I'm not setting dates because we don't know when any of this occurred. We don't know exactly when it occurred, and we don't know exactly what the interpretation of these numbers are. But the way I read it, 2,000 years after he ascended is 2033, which says our rapture has to occur by then. The length of the third day being 1,000 years. After he returns, he reigns for 1,000 years. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Y'all have any comments about that? We haven't done verse 3 yet.
I guess the comment is the same comment I always have on eschatology is making sure that we allow it to posture our hearts in terms of what we do today. How I talk to my coworkers and how I talk to my wife and how I care for my family. All of those things are what I am here to do today, and just making sure that all of that knowledge or all of that attempted interpretation guide my hands and my deeds, my actions for the glory of God today, and that ultimately, like you're saying, I don't need to know that date to be able to do what I'm doing. Just like I don't need to know the how of Genesis 1 and 2 to be able to know that God did it. So it's the same kind of way I typically personally approach.
Yeah, I know that we are closer to the second coming of Jesus Christ than we have ever been. And I know that before that time occurs, that event occurs, we're going to be raptured. So that's what I see from this. We are very, very close. And I can't, I know that when I read through this, I don't know Greek. So in certain times, things I have to depend on other people. But the thing is, I know that the first time we get into dwell in the presence of God is in the millennium. I know that. I'm very clear. I don't think I can be shaken on that. And if that's the case, that makes this third day 1,000 years. I don't see how it can be anything else. But nevertheless, this is what we're talking about. After 2 days, he's going to restore them, but he will not restore them until they seek his face and accept him as Messiah. And that's going to happen right there in the second coming. All right, so let's read verse 3. Let us acknowledge the Lord. Let us press on to acknowledge him. As surely as the sun rises, he will appear. He will come to us like the winter rains. The Jews of today, are looking for the Messiah without any knowledge that he has already come. But they know he will come. That's the thing that gets me. They are fully confident that he will come. They do not realize when he comes, he will be coming again. But they're going to recognize him, and they're going to mourn because of it, because they're going to realize he did come before, and they did crucify him. And they will know he will come with the assurance of the rising sun. They know the sun comes up every day, and with that assurance, they know he is going to come. So that's the end of that.